Well, American troops are returning from Syria. That came as a big surprise announcement from the White House today. The president tweeted the reason the administration plans to bring home around 2,000 service members, saying, quote, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." The U.S. got involved in Syria back in 2014, launching airstrikes there. Since then, American troops started partnering with Syrian ground forces to fight ISIS extremists. The Pentagon recently said ISIS now only controls just 1% of the territory it originally held during the Syrian Civil War. A senior administration official says they believe the remaining pocket of ISIS can be eliminated by regional partner forces.
Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Andrew Gabel from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Andrew, today's White House announcement came as a bit of a surprise. What do you think this was prompted by?
I think the president's view is that he campaigned on removing all troops in Syria. He now has, or he believes he has an opening to make good on that promise, and he's exercising his legal authority to remove the troops from Syria.
When you heard the news, what was your initial reaction?
It came, as you said, as a surprise. As recently as Monday afternoon, the special envoy to Syria, Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, had reiterated the long-term U.S. presence in Syria. What has been the administration policy for the last few months is that there are 3 thresholds that have to be met simultaneously to remove U.S. presence in the east. Those 3 thresholds are the defeat of ISIS, not just as a territorial entity, but as an organization, the removal of Iran's proxy forces and ground troops, and a political process that is a political reform process from the Assad regime that is in accordance with UN Resolution 2254. As of today, not only are those 3 thresholds not met, not one of them is met. And so this does come as a very sudden 180-degree change of strategy from the president.
I would imagine that's why we've already seen from members of the president's own party a little bit of backlash. Senator Lindsey Graham saying, characterizing this as an Obama-like mistake. Thoughts on that?
Well, one does remember President Obama's decision to pull every last troop out of Iraq in 2011, having campaigned to do so. If that is the new strategy, I think one might benefit from looking at what the practical results of that strategy in Iraq were in 2011. The removal of the U.S. troops meant the removal of U.S. political influence. There was a power vacuum that followed the precipitous withdrawal, and that power vacuum was filled with Iran and ISIS. And I think that if the U.S. were to similarly remove its troops from Syria, it would lose all its political leverage in Syria, and the territory that's now controlled by U.S.-backed proxy forces, the Syrian Democratic Forces, would fall into the hands of Iran, Assad, Russia, and Turkey.
How much does Turkey factor into this?
Well, what's interesting is that President Erdogan of Turkey and President Trump had a phone call on Friday. And according to an unnamed U.S. official, it was on the basis of this phone call that Trump began to rethink what had been a fairly consistent U.S. strategy. President Erdogan in recent days has been threatening to conduct military operations cross-border from Turkey to Syria because of what he perceives to be existential threats coming from Kurds on the Syrian side of the border. Kurds, who I might add, dominate the U.S.-backed ground proxy, the SDF.
Yeah, they've been our allies.
They have been. And so it looked like there was this military crisis brewing. Erdogan and Trump share a phone conversation on Friday. What's interesting is on Monday, Jim Jeffries reaffirms the strategy, reaffirms the previous strategy, I should say, the commitment to the East. But then today, Trump announces unilateral withdrawal. And so I don't pretend to have any insider knowledge on what's happening inside the administration, but it does seem that there has been a fundamental change of thinking, at least as far as the president goes.
You have a lot of Republican lawmakers blasting the president for this announcement, but then there are others too who do support it, like Rand Paul. He was saying he's very supportive of this decision and saying that, you know, the United States is so many places, and that at some point we do have to pull out of different areas. What do you say to that line of reasoning?
Yeah, well, I think Rand Paul actually represents a minority within the Republican caucus. From the reaction I've seen, there's been unanimous skepticism of the unilateral withdrawal. Senator Paul is right that we have a global military presence. It's not clear that the 2,000 troops we have in Syria are low return on investment troops. In fact, I would argue they're amongst They generate the highest return on investment because of their political significance, which I touched on before. And I want to emphasize that the U.S. presence in Syria is really nothing like its presence in Iraq. We had over 100,000 troops in Iraq for years upon years on end. We're taking hundreds of casualties a year. It's nothing like this in Syria. I mean, this is really a drop in the bucket in terms of our aggregate force structure. And so even though the troops there are highly elite and they're doing a tremendous job and they punch above their weight, it's not bleeding the U.S. Either literally or bleeding its treasury the way Iraq was. I would argue that we can afford to do what we have to do in eastern Syria, especially given how favorable the situation is right now relative to the alternative, which could easily be a repeat of Iraq. And then you're looking at a situation in which Iran functionally controls territory from the west border of Afghanistan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea.
Andrew Gabel with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you for helping us make sense of this.